So to be a little more specific, it's influenced by sci-fi movies in between Forbidden Planet and Tron.
Original Tron. Not Legacy.
You recently worked, or semi-recently worked on Sayo Yamamoto as the musical producer on Michiko and Hachi, and her project Lupin the Third, A Woman Named Fujiko. I was wondering if you could tell us what you did as a musical producer and how that role felt, because I think that was the first time you were in that role.
So I like music a great deal, so with my anime director roles, I generally also play the music director as well.
それで他の人の作品を見たときに、もうちょっと音楽をこういう風にすればもっと良くなるのにっていう風に思う時がありました。
And there were some times when I would be looking at somebody else's work and thinking, oh, this could be so much better if they just did this and that with the music.
それで、自分が監督した作品以外にも、音楽プロデューサーとして音楽の仕事だけを手伝う仕事をいくつか始めました。
So I started playing the role of the music producer for other people's animes.
音楽プロデューサーをやるときは、作品の内容には一切口を出さないで、その監督がやりたいことに合わせて、より音楽でその作品を良くしていこうというスタンスで参加しています。
So when I take on the role of the music producer, I make sure not to comment on the story or content of the animation, but instead I accept the director's content of the animation and think about how I could tune the music to make this even better.
Was it difficult to switch from action series like Bebop and Shampoo to the more subdued story of Kids on the Slope? And was there anything that was particularly easier or more difficult to do than your previous work?
It wasn't hard.
元からそう青春ものカミングオブエイジのストーリーもやりたいと思っていたんですけど、カウボーイビバップがヒットしたせいで、僕のところに来るオファーが全部アクションもののオファーだったんで、なかなかやる機会がなかったっていう、そういう理由で今までやってなかっただけです。
I'd always wanted to direct a coming-of-age anime, but because Cowboy Bebop was such a success, and because Cowboy Bebop was an action anime, all of the offers that came to me were for action animes. So I just didn't get the opportunity to work on a coming-of-age anime until Aporo.
いつも自分がやったことがない、作品にチャレンジしたいと思っています。
So I always want to challenge myself by taking on directing roles for animes of a genre I've never done before.
次に作るスペースダンディもまた新しいコメディっていうジャンルに挑戦したいと思っています。
So Space Dandy is going to be my attempt at taking on the comedy genre, which is something I've never done before.
This is your first time since Cowboy Bebop the movie to come back to Bones as a director. What was it like coming back to the studio after so many years?
社長がいるんで大変言いづらいです。
You know, the president of Bones is sitting right next to me.
素晴らしい体験でした。
Bones is wonderful.
社長にも聞いてみてください。久しぶりに監督をやらせてどうですか。
Please also ask the president of Bones, Mr. Minami, how it feels to work with me again. He's a wonderful director.
So Space Dandy is getting so much creative talent back together that worked on Cowboy Bebop, and that show had, its fair share of humor in addition to everything else. Since Space Dandy is more of a comedy, can you talk about what kind of approach to humor viewers can expect compared to Bebop?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the last part of your question?
Yeah, since Space Dandy is thoroughly a comedy, what kind of approach to humor can viewers expect compared to Bebop?
ですね、カウボーイビバップの場合は、基本的にシリアスな、話が、8割ぐらいで、コミカルな、話が2割ぐらいあったと思います。
So with Cowboy Bebop, it was 80% serious story and with 20% humorous touch.
スペースダンディはその逆です。
Space Dandy is the opposite.
8割ぐらいはバカな話で、ごく時々、シリアスなっていうか、ハートウォーミングな話だったりとか、ちょっとシリアスなサイファイのストーリーみたいなものが時々入ります。
With Space Dandy, 80% of it is as far from serious as you could possibly get. And the other 20% is a story of a more serious nature, heartwarming stories or more hardcore sci-fi type stories.
One of the most interesting writers working in anime is Keiko Nobumoto, who tends to work with you a lot. I'm just interested why she doesn't seem to work much beyond your work and maybe like one or two other things in anime.
Was that Keiko Nobumoto?
Keiko Nobumoto, yeah.
そうですね、稽古ですね、自分が今まで一緒にやった、脚本の中で一番フィーリングが合うと思っています。
So out of all the script writers I've worked with so far, Keiko is probably the one where we have the best synergy and the best group dynamics.
本当はもっとたくさんの脚本を書いてほしいんですけど、彼女は大変スローワーカーなので少ししか仕事をすることができません。
If it were up to me, I would have her write a lot more scripts. But she's a really slow worker, so she can only write so much.
I'm interested in the decision to work with Thomas Roman. I can't pronounce his name, Thomas Roman. Yeah, I think. Because he's doing ship design for Space Dandy. How did you come to the decision to work with him, and if style is
I've been familiar with his works for some time, and I've been very interested in his work, and I thought he had a lot of talent in his designs.
それで彼は実は別の会社、サンデライトっていう会社の所属だったので、普通は仕事をお願いできないんですけど、無理を言って彼に、特別に許可をもらってデザインしてもらえることになりました。
Unfortunately, he's part of another company, Satellite, so usually we can't ask him for help with our works. But with Space Dandy, we pulled some strings and begged him, and we got special permission for him to help us out.
特別に許可が出た理由は彼が、カウボーイビバップのファンだったからという理由だそうです。
And the reason we got special permission is apparently because he's a fan of Cowboy Bebop.
カウボーイビバップ作っといてよかったと思いました。
Boy, was I thankful I directed Cowboy Bebop.
Yesterday's Q&A, you mentioned that a number of locations inspire you. Could you name a few and what in particular do you love about them?
So there's two towns in particular that have given me a lot of inspiration.
一つは、リオデジャネイロ。
One is Rio de Janeiro.
もう一つは、モロッコの町、たくさんの町です。
And the other is all the towns I visited in Morocco.
モロッコの方はもちろん、カウボーイビバップの、劇場版の中に出てきました。
So you can see a lot of scenes reminiscent of Morocco in Cowboy Bebop movie.
リオもいつか出てくると思います。
And you'll probably be seeing Rio sometime in the future.
できればあれです。ワールドカップの時に呼んでほしいと思っているので、これを記事にしといてくださいと。
I'm secretly hoping that they'll invite me for the World Cup, so please put this in your article.
I play the saxophone. I'm a big fan of jazz. I'm sure you get this question a lot. But I know that there's a big following of jazz in Japan. I was just kind of wondering, what were kind of your first interactions with jazz? How did you really get into it? And did you do any kind of research into jazz and why you decided to put it in a couple of your shows like Kids on the Slope and Cowboy Bebop?
そうですね、いきさつは詳しくは覚えてないんですけど、マイルス・デイビスの「カインド・オブ・ブルー」っていうアルバムをたまたま、耳にしまして、レコードショップで聴いたんですけども、すごくインスパイアされたので、そのレコードショップでそのままそのレコードを買いました。まだ CD の時代の前だったと思います。それは。Kind of Blue.
So I don't remember exactly how I met jazz, but I remember it was something like I walked into a record shop and I was listening to Kind of Blue by Miles Davis, and it really inspired me. It really hit me. I fell in love with it right then, and I left the store with the record.
そうですね、特に坂道のアポロンの時に、ジャズを研究したということはなくて、原作に曲が出てくるんですけども、ジャズの有名な曲が その曲は全部僕はもう知っている曲だったので、特に勉強する必要がありませんでした。
So with Kids on the Slope, I didn't really have a need to study jazz for the show. If you've read the original manga, there are a number of famous jazz songs that appear in it, but they were all songs I was already familiar with, so there was, so I didn't need to put in any extra research into it.
まあいいや、やめます。
Never mind.
長くなるのでやめます。
If you get me started, we're going to go on forever about jazz.
Last night when you introduced Space Dandy, you had a lot of characters that you couldn't get all the way through, and you kind of had to rush through it. Could you, now that you have a little more time to speak, talk about a few of the characters in the show that you didn't have time to flesh out?
I got permission from my boss just now.
たくさんのことを喋ると隣のボスに、殺されるのでちょっと許可を先に取りました。
The boss to my right, he's going to kill me if I say too much, so I had to get permission first.
そうですね、スペースダンディの主人公ダンディで目指しているのは、そうですね、すごく悩みのないキャラを作りたいと思いました。
So let's see, with the main character of Space Dandy, what we were aiming for is somebody who has no worries.
大体、アニメの主人公っていうのはこう悩んだり苦しんだりしてそこでドラマができていくんですけども、そういう悩みが全くないキャラでストーリーを作ったらどうなるだろうというふうに思いました。
So the main character for most animes, they worry about a lot of things, and the story revolves around them worrying about stuff. So I was thinking, what if I had a main character who had no worries? What would the story be like?
僕たちは、日々の人生を、ちょっとした人間関係とかそういう細かいことで悩みながら生きているんですけども、そういう悩みが全てないように生きられたらどんなにいいだろうというそういう理想を込めて作っています。
So in everyday life, we always have friction with other people, and we find ourselves worrying way too much about the smallest things. So Dandy is, what if you had somebody who didn't worry about any of those stupid things at all? It's kind of an ideal in itself that we're trying to pursue with Dandy.
彼は宇宙スケールの人間なので、そんな細かいことは気にしないのです。
He is someone who operates on the scale of the universe, so he doesn't worry about small things.
大丈夫ですか、ボスとかのぐらいで。
Boss, was that okay?
Yes. You probably heard a few years ago, Keanu Reeves was trying to bring a live-action Cowboy Bebop to the screen. Now that project has been put on hold as far as I know. I was wondering, first of all, do you think it would have made a good Spike? And number two, do you think in general anime translates well into a live-action movie?
キャウボーイビーボップの実写版が計画されているみたいですが、もしそれが実現したならば、先生、スパイク役いかがですか？
先生、
渡辺監督がスパイク役を演じるのはどうですか？
ちょっとそれはね、まずダイエットしないといけないですね。
I'd have to go on a diet.
あれ、ライブアクションの、カウボーイビバップについては、あまり多くを語るとサンライズ ルに怒られるのでたくさん言うことができません。
So with regards to live action Cowboy Bebop, if I say too much, Sunrise is going to get mad at me, so I'll leave it at that.
一つだけ言えるのはストップしているわけではないと。ただ動いているわけではないと。
The one thing I can say is that the project isn't at a halt.
Okay.
But at the same time, it's also not moving. 質問の、2つ目の質問ですが、アニメの実写化そのものに関してはどう思われますか？
それはやっぱり作品によると思いますね。
Your question regarding live action versions of anime, I think it really depends on the anime.
例えば実写にしても大丈夫な作品もあると思いますし、難しい作品もあると思います。
So I think there are works of anime that are easily adaptable to live action, but at the same time, there's certain animes that are probably best not being adapted to live action.
例えばドラゴンサムシングみたいな作品ですね。ドラゴンサムシング。
To raise one example, there's a certain dragon something that comes to mind.
Your work and your directing style is kind of unlike anything that's currently being made in anime. I'm interested, if you ever watch anime recreationally, what you look for and what you like, besides everything from Bones, obviously.
いや、やりづらいですね。
This is a hard question to answer.
僕が
Well,
自分が最も影響を受けたアニメーションっていうのはルパンとサードのファースト TV シリーズです。
The anime series that has most inspired me is the first TV series for Lupin the Third.
ルパンとサードはたくさんシリーズがあるので間違えないでください。ファースト TV シリーズだけです。
But there are many seasons and many TV series for Lupin the Third, so please be specific. Lupin the Third, the first TV series.
The first is the best. Yeah.
Yes. Music has been such an important part of your work in the past. For Space Dandy, can you talk about the kind of musical approach you'll be taking this time? What role will play in the show?
Boss, how much can I say?
今回は一人のミュージシャンではなくてすごくたくさんのアーティストに曲をお願いしています。
So with Dandy, we've asked numerous artists to contribute music to the show instead of just one.
多分20人ぐらいのアーティストになると思います。
I imagine we'll have about 20 different artists working on the show.
彼ら多分1人4曲とか3曲とかずつたくさんのアーティストにお願いするっていうスタイルになっています。
So we've taken on the style of asking for 3 or 4 songs from each artist and getting many artists to work on the show.
それは、僕の、好きなアーティストばかりに頼んでいるのですごく面白い音楽、バラエティに富んだ音楽になると思います。
And all of the artists we have working on the show, of course, are my favorite artists. So I think we'll have a great variety of music on the show.
一つだけミュージシャンに オファーする時に、お願いしていることがあります。
But there is one thing that I ask of every artist who's making music for the show.
それは1984年以降の楽器は使わないでくれと言ってます。
And that one request is to not use any instruments invented after 1984.
だから音楽もうちょっとオールドスクールな感じになると思います。
So I think the music on the show is going to be a little old school and retro.
With so many artists working on the show, how do you keep the everybody on track and unified so it sounds like one cohesive thing, or do you want it to sound kind of zany and off the wall?
So when we ask them to help us out on the show, we specifically request that they make music of a certain style.
あとは、僕が基本的にはみんな好きなアーティストばかりを選んでいるので、あまり好きじゃないテイストの曲は入ってこないと思います。
So, and all of the artists we're asking to help us on the show, they're musicians that I personally like, so there won't be any music on the show that I dislike.
アーティストの名前についてはボスが言うなんて言っているので、まだシークレットです。
Now, the musicians who are helping us, my boss is telling me that I can't give you their names, so it's still a secret for now.
A previous artist that you worked on for Samurai Champloo, who's recently passed away, was Nujabisu. Can you tell us about what it was like working with him on that project, since now he's no longer with us?
Could I get the name of the artist again?
Nujabisu.
そうですね、ジャベスはサムライチャンプルを作るときに一番最初にイメージしていたアーティストで、すごくいい感じのコラボレーションができました。
So the composer Nujabisu is the first musician who came to mind when I thought of creating music for Samurai Champloo. So I think we were able to perform a spectacular collaboration together.
作品が作り終わってから、彼と話したんですけども、今まで日本で活動していたんですけど、サムライチャンプルをやった後、すごく外国人からのリアクションが多くなって、そのことをとても喜んでいました。
And I had a dialogue with him after we finished working on the show. Until then, he had been working almost exclusively in Japan, but from Samurai Champloo, he's gotten a lot of great positive feedback from people living outside of Japan. So he was very happy about that.
それで、また一緒にコラボレーションをしようという話をしていたんで、彼が亡くなったことですごくその話がもう不可能になったことがとても残念に思っています。
And we had been talking about collaborating on work again in the future, but that's impossible now due to his passing away. So I'm very sad that we won't be able to work again in the future.
You're heavily influenced by Hollywood film, and your projects often use storytelling techniques associated with live-action film. So my question is, what attracts you to animation as opposed to creating live-action film?
ハリウッド映画が好きって言われると、あまり正確ではないと思うんですけど、70年代に作られたアメリカの映画が僕はとても好きです。
Okay, first I'd like to make a correction. I believe you said Hollywood movie. That is not accurate. Please allow me to correct you. American movies from the 70s.
そうですね。なんだっけ、
どうしてなんですか？
やっぱりアニメを作る上でアニメに影響を受けてアニメを作っているとどうしても過去の作品の、とあまり変わらないやっぱりオリジナリティがない作品になってしまうと思うので違うジャンルからの影響をアニメに入れることで新しいアニメができると思っています。
So as I said yesterday, when you're making anime, if you get all of your inspiration from anime, then your work, you can't help but for it to be reminiscent of old anime, and it's going to lack originality and creativity. So I try to get my inspiration from a different genre to help my anime be more creative and original.
でも、ライブアクションの映画もチャンスがあったらぜひやってみたいと思ってます。
But if I were ever to get the opportunity to direct a live-action movie, that is something I would be very much interested in doing.
How much of Dandy is inspired by Cowboy Andy?
名前が似てるからですか？
Are you asking this question because their names sound alike?
そうですね。カウボーイビバップのファンからすごくよく言われるのは、アンディをもっと出してほしかったということです。
One comment I've gotten from a lot of Cowboy Bebop fans is that they wanted to see more of Cowboy Andy.
そうですね。スペースダンディには、権利の問題があるのでアンディは出てきませんが、作品のスタイルとしてはちょっとアンディのエピソードに似た感じのエピソードがあると思います。
So with Space Dandy, we can't show Cowboy Andy on the show due to intellectual property rights, but I think there will be some episodes in Space Dandy reminiscent of the type of episode you saw in Cowboy Bebop with Cowboy Andy.
In Kids on the Slope, whose decision was it to employ an in-studio drummer so you could recreate that precision of drumming that was also very beautiful? And why was that decision made?
Yes, I was the one who insisted that we do that.
周りのスタッフは全員反対したんですけど、それは無視してやりました。
All of the anime production staff around me, they were against it, but I paid no heed to their voices.
僕はやっぱり音楽にすごくこだわりがあるので、演奏シーンがやっぱり本当に演奏しているように見えないと嫌だったんです。
So I'm very particular about the music I use in my works. So there are a lot of performance scenes. I wanted to make sure it looked like they were actually performing in those scenes.
しかし本当にリアルに演奏シーンを書くのは大変な作業になるので、大体の音楽もののアニメでは演奏シーンをちょっとイメージっぽくしてキャラクターは動いてないけど演奏しているっていった風に見せたりしていました。
But animating an actual performance scene is an incredible amount of work. So with most animes dealing with music, they don't actually show the movement of the characters who are performing the instruments. Instead, they show a lot of stills to sort of portray the image that the characters are performing music.
でも僕はそういうのを見てすごく良くないと思っていたので、自分がやるんだったら本当にキャラクターが演奏しているように見えるシーンにしたいと思いました。
But I really dislike that style of animation when performing music. So I decided long ago that if I were ever to animate a musical performance, I would make it look like they were actually performing.
でも実際にその作業をやってみて、なぜみんながやらないか分かりました。ものすごく大変だからです。
But now that I've actually experienced animating a musical performance like that, I understand why nobody else does it. It's an incredible amount of work.
A lot of your work, stepping back kind of to your influences from Western sources, a lot of your animes feature thematically, and even in terms of character, is explicit blending of Western and Asian and Japanese motifs. Because we have Cowboy Bebop, you have the jazz, you have cowboys, you have kind of the noir detective stories in there. Shampoo has hip hop, and the historic setting, Kids on the Slope even has multiracial characters. Is that something that you're consciously drawn to, kind of this blending of West and East? Or is that just something that happens in the kind of stories that you like to tell?
そうですね。多分無意識な部分が多いと思います。
So I think a lot of it comes unconsciously, unintentionally.
というのはやっぱり日本という国では本当にいろんな国の文化が混ざっているといいますか、例えば映画一つにとっても世界中の国の映画が見れるので、そういういろいろな国の文化に触れながら育ってきたので、そのせいもあって自然にミックスカルチャーになっていくんじゃないかと思っています。
So in Japan, many different cultures come into Japan. For example, with movies, you can see movies from many countries around the world in Japan. So I grew up in an environment where I'm exposed to cultures from many different countries. So I think it was natural that my work reflects many different cultures.
Besides the obvious choices like Dirty Harry or French Connection or Samurai, could you maybe recommend some of the 1970s films that you're a fan of for people to check out so they can understand where you're coming from a little better?
最もおすすめするのはやっぱりこのファーストダーティーハリー is the best これもたくさんのダーティーハリーがありますが、ファーストだけです。
So there are many Dirty Harry movies out there, but the first one.
あとはサム・ペッキンパーの映画はとても好きです。サム・ペッキンパー。Some Peking, it's a director, yeah, like so Wild Bunch, and bring me the head of Alfred Garcia, and Cable Hog のバラードってアメリカのタイトルを思い出す。Cable Hog のバラード。
Do you guys know a movie called something like Ballad of Cable Hogs?
アメリカのタイトルがちょっとわかります。
I can't remember the American title.
Who is the star?
It's Sam Peckinpah film.
Sam Peckinpah.
Straw Dogs?
Straw
Dogs?
No.
Okay, so if any of you guys have Google, the Japanese title is
Ballad of Cable Hog.
Ballad of Cave Hog.
Cable Hog.
Caleb.
And many titles. Okay.
The Ballad of Cable.
Yeah. That one. あとやっぱりダーティハリーの監督であるドン・シーゲルはとても好きです。
And I also like Don Siegel, the director for Dirty Harry.
彼の、映画でとても好きな映画がたくさんあります。
I like many of his movies.
これもアメリカでのタイトルが正しいかどうかは分かりませんが、
So I'm not sure if I have the US title for these movies correct, but
キラーズっていう映画はとても好きです。
I really like the movie Killers.
あと、そうですね、マディガン、刑事マディガンっていうタイトルの日本語だと。
And another movie where the Japanese title is Cage Madigan,
なんだ、ディテクティブマディガン。
or Detective Marigan.
Maybe. あと、もう少し新しい映画でも好きなものもあります。
And of course, there are newer movies that I like also.
あと、ジョン・カーペンターの映画がとても好きです。
I also like John Carpenter movies.
スペースダンディはジョン・カーペンターの影響をとても受けています。
Space Dandy is greatly influenced by John Carpenter.
Like a Dark Star. Dark Star って映画でとても影響を受けています。
Do you guys know the movie Dark Star?
Yes.
Yes. It's heavily influenced by that.
I know Yoko Kanno is performing later today. I was wondering, I know you worked on Cowboy Bebop, or you both helped make the music for that. What were the kind of the collaborations you did to kind of make sure it fit together as what she wanted, what you wanted to for your music? Also, if you were a jazz musician, what instrument would you play?
そうですね。まず彼女は、曲を言った通りに作ってくるわけではありません。
Well, first, let me be on the record as saying she does not compose music exactly the way I tell her to.
勝手に彼女はインスピレーションを膨らませて、カウボーイビバップにはこういう曲がいいというふうに、勝手に曲を作ってきます。
So she gets inspired on her own, blows up her own imagery, and comes to me saying, "This is the song we need for Cowboy Bebop," and composes something completely on her own.
そういう曲を聴いて僕もまたインスパイアされて、新しいシーンを作ったりもしました。
So there were instances where I heard these songs she created for Cowboy Bebop, received inspiration from them, and created new scenes for Cowboy Bebop.
そうやって僕が作ったシーンにまたインスパイアされて彼女が新しい曲を作ってきたりもしました。
And then, and then she would be inspired by these new scenes I create. They would give her new ideas for music, and she would come to me with even more music.
例えばシリーズ後半に使っている曲とかは全く発注してないのに勝手に作ってきた曲もあります。
For example, some songs in the second half of the series, we didn't even ask her for those songs. She just made them and brought them to us.
普通の作品だったら許されないんですけども、カウボーイビバップはヒットしたのでそれが許されました。
Normally, this is unforgivable and unacceptable. But with Cowboy Bebop, it was a big hit, so Hakuna Matata.
そんな風に2人でキャッチボールをしながら作品を作ったというふうに思っています。
So it was a game of catch between the two of us in developing the music and creating the TV series Cowboy Bebop.
Increasingly, we're seeing that anime is becoming more and more insular in that it's oftentimes seems to be made by anime fans, for anime fans, sometimes without anime fans, and you're making works for everybody seeing it. And I'm interested if you feel like that's kind of becoming a problem, bringing new people into anime.
彼が思うには最近のアニメ作品は非常に閉鎖的なものが出てきているみたいです。アニメのファンの人がアニメのファンのために作ったアニメが非常に増えている中、監督の作品はもう幅広くいろんな人に見てもらえるような作品が多いと思いますが、I'm sorry, your question was about anime becoming more insular,
Yeah.
how he feels about it.
Well, how it's that oftentimes the staff are influenced by anime, and therefore they're making anime for other fans of anime, and so there doesn't seem to be as much influence coming from outside of anime to kind of enrich it.
Okay, I'm sorry, that was a statement, not a question.
Well, what I'm saying is that do you feel that this is a problem in bringing in new people into anime who are not
To work on it.
To work on it.
で、スタッフもアニメを見ている人が非常に多いので、さっき言ったように、そこではね、なんで、監督もスタッフを見つけるのは大変ですが、作品のスタッフ
そうですね、ただ僕たちの世代もだんだんベテランになってきたので、若いスタッフを育てるのも大事なことだと思っています。
So my generation of animators, we're starting to become older and become veterans in the industry. So we do believe it's important to develop and nurture younger staff.
例えばスペースダンディのスタッフの若いスタッフの中にはやっぱりオールスクールのライブアクションの映画とかをあまり見ていない人もいます。
So with the staff for Space Dandy, of course there are some younger staff members who have never seen the whole live action movies.
そういう人には、僕らが無理やり、ダークスターを見せたり、無理やり未知との遭遇クローズエンカウンターとサードカインを見せたりしています。
So for those people, we force them to watch Dark Star and Close Encounters of the Third Kind.
そうやって違う分野のものを吸収するようにとしています。
So we forcefully make them absorb ideas of a different genre.
We have time for one more question.
I know that Bones has a tendency to sneak a lot of hidden images into works, especially in the studio name itself. Is there any plans to keep that tradition going in Space Dandy?
作品は隠れたイメージとかがたくさん入っているそうです。特にボーンズの社名の機密のイメージが入っているみたいですが、スペースダンディでもそういうことを行う予定はありますか？
まずボンズの社長に聞いてみましょう。
Let's ask the president of Bones.
社名に秘密が隠されている。
社名に何かメッセージが入っている。
いくつかに入れる。
そうやってダンディもその伏線といいますか、隠された意味を持たせるっていうのがありますか？
もちろんですよ。
Of course.
でも秘密なんで言えません。
But it wouldn't be a secret if we told you what they are.
まだ作品が始まってるわけでも、みんなが楽しんでもらえるようには。
So the TV series hasn't started airing yet, but we'll make sure that it's something that you can enjoy very much.
スペースダンディについて一つだけちょっと言っておこうと思います。
There is one thing I would like to mention about Space Dandy.
各エピソードがそれぞれ別の惑星に行くというストーリーになっていまして、各エピソードごとにすごくガラリとスタイルが変わります。
So in each episode, they'll be going to a new planet. So the style of each episode will be very different episode to episode.
その各話のスタッフにもうすごく自分が尊敬するようなすごいクリエイターであったりとか、すごく面白いデザイナーとか、その各話ごとにすごくいろいろな人が参加しています。
And with the staff for each episode, for every episode, there is a great creator that I respect immensely, or a fabulously talented designer. So we are making sure that each episode is unique and you can enjoy each episode.
彼らはとても仕事が忙しいので、いつもはなかなか仕事が頼めないんですが、1本だけっていうふうにお願いすると結構やってくれる人が多いので、それで、たくさんの面白い人に参加してもらえることができました。
So these creators and designers, they're generally very busy people, and it's hard to get their time for a project. But if you go up to them and say, just one episode, it's a lot easier to get their time. So you'll see a great collaboration between multiple creators and designers.
名前は言いたいんですけど、またこのボスが言うなって言ってるんで、その名前は、また今後少しずつ発表したいと思います。
And of course, I am just dying to share some of these names with you guys, but my boss to the right, he is saying no, so you'll just have to wait until we slowly announce the staff for each episode.
Well, thank you all for coming. I still didn't feel like all your business.